Good evening. Tonight, let's talk a little bit about the massive missile attack that Russia launched on Ukraine today. Reporting overnight has indicated that there have been multiple sites within Ukraine targeted by cruise missile strikes, launches occurring both from long-range sea-based facilities and also from a range of platforms of strategic and heavy strategic bombers. If we look at the map here today, down the bottom right here is Crimea, and then looking up here to the northwest of Ukraine, we can see all of these icons, these little red icons that we've dropped on the map here of these flames, locations that today have either now conclusively reported being struck by missiles or were earlier in the day reports of missiles heading their way. Now, earlier today, all of Ukraine was under air raid warnings. In the maps that they show on the some of the Telegram channels of Ukraine, indicating the oblasts that are in red when they're under an air raid warning. All of Ukraine was under air raid warnings today. You can see strikes as far west as Lvov, Lutsk, Ternopol, the Khmelnitsky region, and the Starokostyantyev airport here. This is the airport which was struck last week, and houses the Su-24s, which are capable of launching Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles. Vinnitse here in sort of central west Ukraine. Odessa reporting both geranium drone and missile strikes. Dnipro, Zaporozhye, and then even over here in the east around the Kramatorsk area reporting missile strikes. What is worth noting is the launch locations reportedly involved today. So zooming out on this map a little bit. Now, if we go from, let's say, the Kramatorsk area, which is the closest launch site in the east to the Caspian Sea, we've got a distance of about 1,200 kilometers there. So some of the aircraft in today's attack, their launch point is from the Caspian Sea. As you can see, that's 1,000 kilometers or more away from the nearest target. So those planes are kept safely out of reach of Ukrainian air defense. Other launch location, Veliki Novgorod here in Russia. Again, it's a significant distance from here down to the next closest target at Lutsk is nearly 900 kilometers away. And then a third likely location for some of the aircraft that I'll talk about in a moment, some of the T-160s, up here on the Kola Peninsula. So up somewhere around this region. Now this is, getting to be 1,800 kilometers, nearly on the way towards 2,000 kilometers, perhaps, depending on where those missiles launched from there were struck. Quite possibly, hundreds of missiles have been launched in this attack today. There's reports that Decoy missiles were also launched. So, some cheap things that look like missiles have some propulsion. I guess are able to do some level of targeting, but do not contain all the expensive componentry and the explosive warheads. Also reportedly been fired. These would be fired to attempt to deplete air defense systems by wasting interceptors on dummy decoy missiles, and also perhaps sent out to alert a Russian air crew and the Air Force to the location of Ukrainian air defense systems by getting those air defense systems to reveal themselves early. Something on their radar screens looks like a cruise missile. It's worth activating and trying to take down, when in fact it may just be a decoy. Some of the aircraft reportedly used here today in these strikes, the Tu Tupolev 22M3 long-range bomber. These were launched from the Novogorod Soltsy Airfield. This plane here was the first supersonic bomber of the Soviet Union, introduced in the 1960s. It has also an electronic warfare variant, and often one of those will be electronic warfare variants will be stationed with a group of bombers to provide electronic warfare coverage for them. It has a maximum speed of Mach 1.42, or just over 1,500 kilometers per hour, 940 miles per hour on the old scale. And in terms of its armament, it does carry a cannon in the tail turret. It has a 23mm tail cannon. It can carry one Kh-22 missile. Now, the Kh-22 missiles have a range of about 3,500 kilometers, thereabouts. The second, they can also carry up to 12,000 kilograms of ordnance. So they could carry 24 Fab 500 bombs, or up to one Fab 9000 bomb. Now, other craft reportedly in the attacks today, the Bear, the Tupolev Tu-95. These are a strategic bomber. These are the ones launched from the Caspian Sea. They have a much lower, obviously they're a propeller-driven plane. They're a much lower maximum speed of only 925 kilometers per hour, or 575 miles per hour. They are equipped with two 23mm Gryazev Shupanov autocannons in the tail turret, and missiles they can carry up to 15,000 kilograms, including the Kh-20, the Kh-22, the Kh-55, 101s and 102s. And they can also carry or 8 Kh-101, 102 cruise missiles mounted on underwing pylons. So these are capable of delivering quite a few missiles. The final Russian aircraft reportedly involved in today's strikes, the Tu-160 heavy bomber. This has a maximum speed of 2,220 kilometers per hour, or Mach 2.05, and or over 1,380 miles per hour. Maximum range of 12,300 kilometers, and their armament bay allows for 45,000 kilograms of ordnance. Just remember that the Tu-95 could take 15,000 kilograms of missiles. This can take 45,000 kilograms. And it has two internal rotary launchers, each holding 6 Kh-55 or 101 or 555 cruise missiles. It can even be equipped with Raduga Kh-15 short-range nuclear missiles, but clearly it's not been carrying those at the moment. The reporting today again was of large numbers of aircraft being in the air. You're getting up towards 20 aircraft in total perhaps involved in these strikes. So combined with some of these long-range sea-based missiles, it's very possible that this is one of the biggest missile strikes we've seen deployed in a single instance, with perhaps over 100 missiles having possibly been launched today. On the battlefront today, let's just go back to our map for a moment here. So starting up in the north, up here, just near in the Kharkiv region, up near Kupiansk, which is on the northern point of this Russian offensive front line, where the Russians are slowly advancing westward. There have been reports today that there have actually been approaches into some of the areas of Kupiansk by the Russians. I believe some of the northern outskirts of Kupiansk itself. The Russian Ministry of Defense has given us its daily update. I'll read through some of that today. In the Kupiansk direction, the Ministry of Defense of Russia indicates that 6 enemy attacks and counterattacks have been repelled in this area today. Enemy losses were up to 65 servicemen, 3 armoured fighting vehicles, 2 pickup trucks, 1 German-manufactured Panzerhaubitze 2000 self-propelled artillery system, 2 Polish-manufactured Krab self-propelled artillery systems, 1 Gwozdika self-propelled howitzer, as well as M-Star B and D-30 howitzers. Now, as I've mentioned recently, the Russians certainly seem to be attempting to pick off the Ukrainian artillery capability. So these self-propelled artillery systems, things that look like big oversized tanks but are a large artillery piece mounted on tracks. In this area of Kupiansk today, this seems to be a larger number than normal of self-propelled howitzers being claimed to have been destroyed by the Russians in today's fighting. Here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at least 6 pieces destroyed in this area, in this sort of Kupiansk area around here, perhaps as far as halfway down this line. In the Krasny Liman area, which is down now to this southern area of this line, this is where the center group of forces are operating. 2 enemy attacks have been repelled, is being reported. In this area, the Russian Ministry of Defense reports Ukrainian losses. It's 90 servicemen, 3 armored fighting vehicles, and 2 pickup trucks. Interestingly, no reports in this southern area of artillery, so perhaps those other ones spread across this whole line might be what the reporting is indicating there. I must say that the Ministry of Defense of Russia, their reporting, while it is consistent in its reporting of statistics in terms of their estimated losses of Ukrainian men and equipment, it does lack in the colour and perhaps the volume or intensity of the fighting. In many of the both Ukrainian and Russian telegram channels, the video footage and the reports that come out each day give a better impression of the actual severity of these clashes and this combat. There's a wealth of information out there showing just how brutal some of this fighting really is in these areas, with constant shelling occurring in some areas and persistent drone attacks. In one video, which I won't show today because of the nature of the video itself, but it showed again the capabilities of drones in warfare. A small FPV drone was tracking 4 or 5 men running into a building, circled around. It appears as though the men had no idea the drone had seen them. This was a house, a residential home. It appeared to be. The garage door was open, and the drone positioned itself, flew in through the open door. The last scene was what looked to be 2 civilian-type sedan cars parked in the garage, and then an explosion, and then smoke and fire engulfing the property, and no one visibly exiting the property. But I can't imagine what that must be like, being on the front line. And they appeared to be not near the actual combat line. That could be wrong, but it didn't appear as though the area they were in was particularly damaged. So you may well be thinking that you were quite protected, away from the threat and immediate danger, and clearly that was a mistake in this case to have thought that, if that's what they had thought. Moving down into the Donetsk, into the Donetsk region down here. Reporting this is the area where the Yug group of forces are operating. Again, there are reports of multiple Ukrainian attacks. These attacks being successfully repelled near Belogorovka, Vodyanoye, Krasnogorovka, and other areas in the Donetsk People's Republic. The enemy losses here reported to be 150 Ukrainian servicemen, 2 tanks, 3 armoured fighting vehicles, 5 motor vehicles, as well as a UK-manufactured FH-70 and M-Star-B howitzers. Now, again, the Ministry of Defense of Russia reports on these Ukrainian servicemen losses. What we allegedly learnt a month or so ago from the Minister of Defense, Sergei Shoigu, was that the Russians are able to intercept Ukrainian communications, and that's how they get these numbers, that they're actually listening into Ukrainian reports back to their headquarters of the losses that they have suffered. Now, I can't corroborate that, but that has been the reason given by the Ministry of Defence as to why they report these numbers and as to why that they believe that they are an accurate number. If this is true, then you would imagine be a more accurate way for the Russians to estimate casualties of the Ukrainians, other than attempting to base that upon visual losses of bodies and that sort of thing. It would be very difficult to get an accurate number there. Moving down into the of note that just around Avdiivka here, just north of Donetsk, where there is heavy fighting going on, it has been for a long time. Avdiivka is the area where the Donetsk People's Republic report that Ukrainian artillery is located that has been shelling Donetsk city since 2014. There have been reports over the last couple of weeks of intensification of the shelling of Donetsk by the artillery in Avdiivka. There is a report today of an ammunition depot of the 53rd Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces having been destroyed near Avdiivka. Now, Avdiivka, well, not shown on my map here, I don't show the front line on this map, is somewhat encircled by Russian forces. This main supply road in here is under Russian fire control, yet it is still open. Losing an ammunition dump within here will be a significant setback to the forces in Avdiivka. We haven't had a great deal of reporting about what's happened here in the last week or so, but I imagine we will get more from Avdiivka if Russia decides to close the pincers and shut off that road, or even if they continue to take the approach like they seem to have done in Bakhmut, Tyormsk as the Russians now call Bakhmut, where they left access open into the area so that the Ukrainians could resupply, and reportedly did this as a tactic, as a means of attriting the Ukrainian forces by enticing them in to an area which the Russians believe they would defend. Avdiivka seems to be another similar scenario to that, where it appears the Ukrainians will defend it heavily, not wanting to lose the morale and PR that they would lose if Avdiivka were to fall to the Russians as well. Now, in South Donetsk, just going to move the map over here. In this area here, South Donetsk, around Staromayorsk and Yorozhne, which is where the Vostok group of forces are operating. There has been heavy battles around Staromayorsk and Yorozhne. The Russians have here been using the flamethrower systems These are the TOS-1 thermobaric weapons. Particularly nasty piece of equipment, really. If you had to choose to have something being thrown at you, the flamethrower thermobaric weapons would probably not be it. There are reports that Eurozhny, that Ukrainians have made it into Eurozhny. Now, this, much like Robotny, further to the west, these areas seem to be going backwards and forwards and seem to be very difficult for anyone to actually claim and hold in any great capacity due to the small size of these settlements. This Varemka ledge, which we're looking at just here, this is where the Ukrainians have worked their way down this ledge, this riverway, this road, and this valley just to the east of this ledge. From the Skuchny up here in Varemka, down here through Makarivka, Stamroysk to Eurozhny. The fighting through here, though, has been very hard and heavy, given the Russians hold some of the highlands around here, and they have also reported very heavy losses in making this advance. So the Ministry of Defence reports that in the South Donetsk region in the last 24 hours, the enemy losses are up to 240 Ukrainian servicemen, 3 armoured fighting vehicles, 3 motor vehicles, 2 US-manufactured M777 artillery systems, and 1 French-manufactured Caesar self-propelled artillery system. Moving across from here, just moving across into the Zaporozhye region. Zaporozhye here. And here, Orkiv region, Robotny. 2 enemy attacks close to Rabotino or Robotny in the Zaporozhye region were also repelled, along with the actions of 1 Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance group. Enemy losses are reported as being, enemy being Ukrainian losses, are reported as being 50 Ukrainian servicemen, 1 tank, 2 infantry fighting vehicles, 3 motor vehicles, another US-manufactured M777 and another French-manufactured Caesar self-propelled artillery system, plus a Polish-manufactured Krab self-propelled artillery system. So we can see here that in one day of fighting along the line, losses have been probably getting up near 10 or 12 artillery pieces, a number, 1 or 2 tanks, a number of infantry fighting vehicles, a heavy loss of equipment for a single day fighting. Moving further to the west, now down to the Kherson region. In Kherson, I might just switch our map back over here to the satellite view, but here's our Antonovsky Bridge here. And here is Kozachny Laheri, the area here where the Ukrainians have also established now some bridgehead across the Dnipro River. In Kherson, it's brief reporting today from the Ministry of Defence. Losses up to 30 Ukrainian servicemen, 3 motor vehicles, and 1 Spanish-manufactured Alacran self-propelled mortar. You can see that in the loss of artillery equipment, a lot of the artillery equipment is Western supplied. French Caesar, UK, Spanish, American, Polish Krab. Clearly a lot of Ukraine's original Soviet era equipment has been depleted. Still seeing things like M-Star Bs and M30s being reported as being destroyed, but also a lot of Western equipment in there. In Odessa today, so just moving ourselves down here. sorry, dreadful luck there with my screen. With Odessa, we have had here reported strikes, missile strikes and drone strikes again, and reports of an S-300 surface-to-air missile battery system being hit just a little bit north of Odessa here, up in the Nikolaev region, up around here. Interestingly, in the far north, there was some activity up in the Barents Sea today, where so the Barents Sea up here, Norway and Finland, Sweden, Norway coming up to here, and Russia over here. Russian airspace control facilities over the waters of the Barents Sea scrambled a MiG-29 fighter jet from the air defence duty of the Northern Fleet Forces in order to identify an air target which had been detected and prevent violation of the state border of the Russian Federation. A Norwegian R-8A Poseidon reconnaissance plane was approaching the Russian state border after the MiG-29 approached. The foreign aircraft, or the Norwegian aircraft, turned away from the border. Yeah, just interesting little, niggles going on. This occurring here over the Black Sea. We had reports yesterday of American drones, I think MQ-9 drones flying around this area of the Black Sea. All of these things will be, being monitored by the Russians, but will be of some concern to the Russians. Some level of distraction, having to keep an eye on these things, and in diverse regions, as the bottom of the Black Sea and the top of Barents Sea. Someone who will be pleased that the Russians are being annoyed and niggled, John Bolton. So John Bolton's a former national security advisor for the United States. That is so Jake Sullivan's current role. John Bolton held this. He was security advisor under President Trump recently. In a Wall Street Journal piece, he has stated that the solution to the Ukraine conflict is neither negotiations nor a ceasefire, but in fact that American President Joseph Biden begins working energetically for the Ukrainian victory. So John Bolton, a hawk, traditionally I call it a war hawk, but a neocon now in the more modern term used to represent people who are very keen to fight the Western wars for the US. Bolton has also, in an article this week in The Guardian, stated that he believes that the US will leave NATO if Trump wins the presidency. Now, Trump in the past, and when he was in power, was critical of NATO and saw it as sucking from the teat of the US. The US contributes more financially and in terms of equipment than any other member of NATO. Trump, was really commenting that it was really a European group, and America didn't need to be in it, and that if the countries did not pay more, that he could see America not committing to, say, for example, a NATO Article 5 scenario. So Trump was sort of threatening the other NATO nations that if they didn't cough up more to provide for NATO, that America might not turn up if an Article 5 situation were to be called. So interesting one to see what may happen there. It's certainly possible that Donald Trump will become president again. It would be a very big move for him to leave NATO. However, depending on the political climate in the run-up to November 2024, it may well become one of his policy pieces. One part of his platform may be to end the war, if the war is continuing then. And it may well be something that would get him over the line with a lot of voters. By that time, I can imagine a lot of American taxpayers will be wearing thin, becoming bored with their tax dollars being sent into Ukraine if there's no results for them in Ukraine. And at this stage, there are no results for them in Ukraine. Russia controls approximately a quarter, 25% or thereabouts of the Ukrainian territory. They're not going backwards in holding that land. They're taking more of that land in the north, which is working them slowly towards Kharkiv, and then from Kharkiv slowly towards Kyiv, the capital. So yeah, it will be interesting to see what might happen if John Bolton might be right, and if the NATO alliance may change its structure in 2024 if it becomes part of the political landscape, whether the US support continues, because, and where I guess I'm going with this is, you could imagine that if US support were to stop and the rest of NATO didn't wish to, that would create a large fracture within NATO, and may end up resulting in, say, the US leaving the alliance. Who knows? A little bit of an update on Niger. So the Nigerian leadership, the new leadership there, after their announcement to charge the deposed former President Bazoum effectively with treason and acting against the will of the good of the country, ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, their chiefs of defence staff have rescheduled their military planning session to the 17th and 18th of August. Now, prior to the new Nigerian leadership announcing they would charge the president, or ex-president, that session had been suspended indefinitely. So it seems now that ECOWAS are interested perhaps in some level of military intervention there. Also interesting is Germany. So Germany is debating whether they will ban the growing and one of the larger parties, the AfD, which is the Alternative for Germany party. A comment in Der Spiegel, German newspaper, by the German government about AfD, so an opposition party, was with relation to the Ukraine war, was that once the invasion was launched, the AfD called for peace with Vladimir Putin, showing no regard whatsoever for the survival of Ukrainians. Now, this is an interesting comment. So the opposition party, the AfD, once the invasion was launched, they called for peace with Vladimir Putin. And the government of Germany is now claiming that by calling for peace, the AfD was showing no regard whatsoever for the survival of Ukrainians. Now, if peace had been found in February of 2022, by some counts, there may well be 300,000 surviving Ukrainians who aren't surviving today. And all of the associated families, friends, children, loved ones, wives, sons, daughters, parents, that will be suffering because peace wasn't found. So I find this a very interesting statement that the current German government is somehow combining the idea that the opposition party, the AfD, calling for peace shows no regard whatsoever for the survival of Ukrainians. Now, again, if peace had been called back in 2022, it looks like what might have happened in terms of the Ukrainian borders is that with the eastern areas of Luhansk and Donetsk would have become independent or become part of Russia. Crimea would have remained with Russia, but areas like Odessa and anything west of the Dnipro River, and probably most of the oblasts in the northeast and east of the Dnipro River would all have remained Ukrainian, and all Ukraine would have had to have done would have been to confirm that they would no longer attempt to join NATO, and at a top level remain neutral. That would have been the big thing. So I actually think that by calling for peace at that stage would have been the best way to show regard for the survival of Ukrainians. Anyhow, the AfD, a little bit of background on them. They're an interesting party, and I think they're going to become more prominent in Germany in the coming years, as they are growing in recent polls in popularity. And they seem to be growing due to a pushback against the more liberal, modern, postmodern, perhaps, values of the current German government. The mainstream considers them or paints them as being right-wing. They were probably more accurately considered to be conservative, slightly right-wing, national conservative. They're critical of the European integration. So they were supportive of the European Union, but critical of the European integration, which is a process of industrial, economic, political, legal, social, and cultural integration of states wholly or partly in Europe or nearby. So this is a challenge for any nation, where you have to effectively average out your processes, your economy, your legal model, your social and cultural qualities across to sort of join out and level and become one wider Europe. This is clearly something that very few nations wish to do. All nations have got cultures. They all wish to protect their cultures. So AfD not particularly keen or critical on that. They're also not impressed with the fact that in the past, because of their being part of the EU, they've had to prop up other nation states with things such as financial bailouts to Greece, that sort of thing in the past. They, interestingly, are the only party represented in the Bundestag whose environmental and climate policy is based on a denial of human-caused climate change. So they do recognise rising temperatures, but they don't draw a correlation with human activity in being the sole driver of the rise in temperature, and instead, I think, take a more balanced approach at the climate question, I think, is probably the right term. The climate crisis, I think, is a term which is used in the mainstream in the West to try to excite and frighten people. There seems to be a lot of evidence around that temperatures on the planet do rise. They've risen and fallen many times in the history of the Earth, and that carbon dioxide is a necessary requirement for plant growth, and that higher levels of carbon dioxide allow for higher levels of crop growth, higher yields of crops, higher yields perhaps without the need for additional nitrogen-based fertilizers. So I think that the AfD are looking at some of that information and perhaps balancing that against the climate crisis cries of the EU. Economically, AfD is liberal in economic terms. They emphasise deregulation and would like to see a much smaller amount of state intervention. There were some early factions who were looking to advocate protectionism of German industry over free trade, but this doesn't seem to have really taken hold within the AfD overall. In general, I think they're more aligned with the idea of party policies that would see free trade rule over protectionism. In terms of immigration, it wants to end what it sees as unchecked mass immigration and return to a pre-EU model where you have a merit-based immigration system, so that people who are willing to display credentials, be able to agree to work with the German society and assimilate, speak German and things like that in Germany, would be given preference in an immigration policy over the EU open borders one, which again causes challenges for more developed nations within the EU, where migrants will enter through southern EU nations, but then can travel to ones which are more economically developed or have even better social welfare systems. And so I think Germany is a nation which is finding challenges with how they manage that. The AfD have mentioned that they would prefer to see German population growth occur through domestic birth rates rather than population growth through immigration. On the topic of conscription, they would like to reinstate conscription starting for men at the age of 18 in Germany. Their stance on NATO and the United States, they have traditionally been pro-NATO and friendly to the United States as a party. However, they are very critical of Joe Biden's administration. And the party has been divided on whether to support Russia and oppose sanctions on Russia supported by NATO and the United States. In 2019, the then party leader Alexander Goland said in an interview with the Russian newspaper Komsomolskaya Pravda that they consider the war in Donbass, so this is the war in Donbass prior to the special military operation, or what's now the Ukraine war. They then considered it to be a Ukrainian internal matter, and that Germany should not get involved in the internal affairs of Ukraine or Russia. It's also said that it was against Western sanctions imposed on Russia. They have called for a more independent stance from the United States. And they have also been vocal in suggesting that the United States was involved in the Nord Stream pipeline bombings in 2022. Seymour Hersh, who did an investigative reporting piece on this, came to similar conclusions. And they have also called out NATO's anti-Russian stance as being overly ideological and detrimental to Germany's interests. So this is one of the growing German political parties. I think they may be the third largest political party in Germany. And I think this demonstrates some of the pressure that NATO will have to contend with over the next couple of years if they do plan to continue the conflict in Ukraine, because it's quite possible that within 2 years, support in the US might be dropping, with Trump perhaps, or even Ron DeSantis, who has effectively referred to the Ukrainian conflict as a domestic dispute between Ukraine and Russia, and why should America be involved in it? You might find that in Germany, if there's a change in power in Germany at their next elections, or even if there's not a change in power, but if there's a significant groundswell and the party in power recognises that support for the Ukraine conflict will get them booted out, you may well start to see NATO weakening. I think this is one of the big fears of people like John Bolton, is that the NATO alliance may lose its rigour and its support, and that this would then lead to a new and unexplored level of geopolitical chaos throughout Europe. If NATO and the EU were to become threatened, we've had Brexit. If that were to spread, then you have a lot of political change descending upon Europe for a number of years, which will not proceed smoothly or easily. All right. That was a bit of a different one for tonight, getting out talking about some political stuff, not just focusing on Ukraine, but it was a bit of in some respects, in terms of battlefront activity, a bit of a quieter news day coming out from Ukraine. Look, thank you very much if you've watched this far, or if you've listened this far. If you are enjoying these reports on the channel, please subscribe if you haven't already. Tell your friends if you think they'd be interested, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.